Um, all right, yeah, so a new person we have with us is Ben Calleros. He's one of our attorneys. Yesterday we had Sarah with us. Ben is filling in for her for this last bit of the meetings today. But we are really grateful for all of you taking the time to be here. I think we've had some really good productive conversations. What I'm gonna do is kind of do a little bit of a recap of the conversations that we've had over the last 2 days to just make sure that we're focusing in on the right things, make sure that we heard from you all kind of the main themes, make sure that we're aggregating the main themes that we heard from you all over the last couple of days. So we'll go ahead and dive right into it. If I can get my computer to cooperate. There we go. All right, so again, to kind of go back to the very, very beginning, what we are focusing on is management plans. The management plans are the core regulatory document for active management areas. The statutes, statutes for active management areas lay out a little bit of the skeleton, and the management plan helps fill in all of the details. The management plans are the regulatory document where the details of the conservation requirements for water users in the AMA are located. So that's what we're here talking about. We have come a long way in the last 24 hours. We've done a lot of work in thinking about what those conservation requirements might be and how wrapping our heads around how we understand our boundaries with those conservation requirements. So yeah, I really am thrilled with how productive these discussions have been. And I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, but a clearer path now than we did just 24 hours ago. So the way we are working through developing these management plans is with a series of public meetings. We want to make sure that we are being transparent in this process and sharing as much information as we need to make sure that we're all on a little bit of a level playing field in terms of can we be informed enough to talk about these issues in kind of a blunt and creative manner. I think this series of meetings was a really great example of that. And again, I do appreciate you all participating and being candid throughout this process. Go ahead.
Is there a higher level than yourself at DWR that influences how this AMA is going to be managed, or are you the highest authority?
So I'm the active management area director.
Yeah.
We have an agency director who is the final decision on the management plans. I and the other staff here will be working very closely with our agency director as we work through this process and actually write drafts and that type of thing for the management plan. So we'll certainly be taking his opinions and thoughts into account. He has the final say, but we'll be making sure to work very closely with him to make sure that we're incorporating that along the way, so that you all aren't taken off guard by anything that he might have in that development.
With that said, how do you and your staff interface with the governors and the your stated that have appointed water board on the state level?
Sure, good question. So I know we have a couple people on the webinar, so I'm just going to repeat it. So the question is, how do we interface with the governor-appointed council for each active management area? So there will be a groundwater users advisory council for this AMA. They have not been appointed yet. I don't have a timeline on when they'll be appointed, but specifically related to the management plan, one of the roles of the GUAC is to advise and make recommendations on management plans before they're adopted. So because of that requirement, we will need to have a GUAC before we're able to move forward with adopting a plan. So we'll have that council established. We'll sit down and have a formal meeting with them and walk through the plan and make sure that we're getting their input and advice on what that plan should look like.
I understand what you said, and I understand the process to there. My question is, the next level up on the governor's water council that Farm Bureau and, the other, the one senator stepped off of. Are they going to step in and approve or modify what we do, or do we have advises the governor and directs we do?
Okay, so the governor's Water Policy Council is what you're talking about there.
Yes.
The governor's Water Policy Council doesn't have a formal role in any of this. So the process is that the GUAC would make recommendations to the ADWR director. ADWR director will take the input of these groups, of the GUAC, and incorporate those considerations as we move toward adopting the
And
plan.
who else puts pressure on the director besides the governor?
I think that's a hard question to answer. There are lots of ways folks can provide information to the director. Part of that is through this type of a process, because I'll be working directly with him to help him understand the conversations that we've had over the last couple of days, and help him understand how we might build these programs in a way that both reflects the values of Douglas and also is functional in terms of water management.
With that statement, through this process, is there any correlation between your legal process and the legal process the feds have to go through? Is there a door at the back end of this, or folks like the Central Cloud University to step in and put a stamp on the legal and file litigation and override everything we do?
So there is a formal legal adoption process for a management plan. That process includes a public hearing. It includes noticing of folks in the basin, and it includes a formal adoption, formal comment periods and formal adoption processes. So anyone is able to comment during those formal comment periods. Once we adopt a plan, there's also appeal periods, request for rehearing or review, or options for judicial review as well. So there are multiple steps along the way that anyone could provide input or appeal a given decision.
If an organization files an appeal and it goes to judicial review, do either of those instances stop the implementation of the AMA until the court has made a decision?
It would not stop the implementation of the AMA. It could potentially stop the implementation of that specific management plan until that was resolved, but the other requirements associated with the AMA would continue. And the other requirements associated with the AMA might be things like grandfathered rights and reporting requirements, well impact analyses, that type of thing.
So I guess from a producer's standpoint, if it ends up at judicial review, we keep operating the same way we have always operated until the water is adjudicated?
As if the AMA remains in place, but we would need a determination on whether the management plan would remain in place or not.
And would that happen before the judicial allocation or adjudication, or during the process?
Well, I think the question is, and maybe clarify if I don't quite repeat this right. My understanding of the question is, if a management plan was challenged and went to judicial review, I guess it could potentially go two ways, where it was either kind of put on hold and wouldn't be allowed to go into effect, or it could go into effect kind of pending the result of that decision. Would it be either, or would it be one or the other? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer. I can look
Okay.
into it. I would assume might be put on hold. I don't know. Yeah, it might be able to go forward
Okay.
pending the judicial review.
Okay.
But that's something I'll
We-
I couldn't understand what you said.
So it might, the management might be able to move forward pending the judicial review, but that's something I'm not certain about. I'll need to look it up. What's your question? Whether
If
the judicial-
if it goes to judicial review or an appeal, as a farmer, am I operating as I did under the INA, reporting my use to you and waiting for the adjudication of the water?
So no, whether the plan goes into effect or not doesn't change the fact that the AMA is in place. The INA is no longer.
No, I understand that the AMA is here.
Yeah.
My question is, when it goes to appeal and judicial review, as a farmer, can I still keep farming? In farming, or are you gonna start saying, next year we're gonna do a 1% or 2% cut in water?
Okay,
Yes, so I'll need to look into that to double check.
Could you do that?
Yeah, I will, because I think the issue is whether, and honestly, it might depend on which judge it gets put in front of. A judge might say, you cannot implement this plan while I'm reviewing it, or the judge might say, the plan is in place pending my review. I don't, I'll look into it for sure, but it could depend on what the judge says too. At the moment, it's appealed. So I know that's some uncertainty right now, but it's something I'll look into. I'll tell Natalie and she can share it with you.
That
so,
would be very much
what-
appreciated, because it grossly affects farming operations.
Sure.
and I guess what I will say is that water duties and those total allotments are established through the management plan process. So you wouldn't have a total allotment until a given management plan went into place, and there wouldn't be additional cuts to a given allotment until a future management plan came into place, right? So there wouldn't be a structure for us to be able to say, you're using this much water, you have to cut it by 1%, because that's something that belongs in a management plan. And if the management plan was being appealed, we wouldn't be adopting a separate management plan in the process while that was being appealed, if that makes sense.
Because my legal counsel in Phoenix is telling me, if it goes to judicial review, it blocks the whole process up until the water is adjudicated.
It would,
That's my question. Is that in point of fact, or is that an opinion?
it would pause the management plan. It would not pause the AMA.
Correct, but the management plan is what's going to come.
The management plan is what contains the water duties and the total allotments.
So when the management plan gets blocked, I can still keep irrigating as I did in the past.
I think the answer is yes.
That's what I've been given to
Yeah.
understand on legal.
Okay. Okay, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you would be able to continue, there wouldn't be like a stop action on all farming or anything like that with a potential stay on the management plan. It would be more, these additional requirements aren't going into place until there's a further decision by the courts.
Thank you,
Okay.
Then the other thing, if it does come back and the plan has to be modified, we need as a group to modify it, or the WEAC modifies it, or the director modifies it.
So it's under the director's authority to lay out a process for that modification. Typically, we would do something like this and have some public discussions about what that modification would look like. By statute, by law, we would have to go through another public hearing process with public comment, all of that to get through the adoption process for a modification. So there is by statute a required public process, and by kind of historical precedent, what the department has always done in the past is we've also had these types of more informal conversations as well.
And the other variable there is, what input does the judge hearing the case have to affect how the management plan is, not how it's modified, but how we meet again to do this all over? Can the judge change the whole ballgame?
So I think if the management plan's up for judicial review and the judge says, and the judge, let's see, agrees with the person appealing it, saying that we need to do a new management plan, under the statute, the judge can't say you need to do X or Y. The judge can just say, I'm sending it back and you basically will have to do the process over again.
And the process is driven by statutory authority.
Yeah, and it's part of basically what we've been doing here, of holding these public hearings and getting input and then crafting the plan. And that would most likely be the result of a successful appeal against the plan. There's also other ways someone could ask the department to review the plan and change it, to have the department change certain aspects of it. And then they could also appeal that to have the judicial review of the plan itself. I think, yeah, the most likely thing would be the judge would not be trying to rewrite the plan, him or herself. They'd be sending it back to this, basically what we're doing here.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for your consideration.
All right, so we've talked a lot about thank you though. We've talked a lot about how management plans are developed. We will have additional meetings because a management plan is not just agriculture. So we will have additional meetings related to municipal and industrial conservation programs and also other considerations that need to be included in a given management plan. Our biggest principle here, our one statutory criteria for conservation programs is that it's required to reduce groundwater withdrawals. So any given program that we might want to develop, we've talked about a lot of different options today, any given program that we would be able to adopt as a part of a management plan needs to check that box, reducing groundwater withdrawals.
Does statute indicate any parameters on reduction?
No, it just says reducing.
But if the plan goes out, it can go to judicial review over the reduction. Is that correct?
Help me understand what you mean by that.
If we come up with a plan and we're saying we're gonna do a 1% reduction per year for the next 10 years, and see where we're at, and then readdress the plan. When that goes out for public review in the final stages, and an organization step in and protest that 1% and say it's too high or too low?
Yes, they probably could attempt to appeal it under that, but maybe under that rationale. But again, because the statute doesn't dictate anything specific, and when you have a decision like this, basically this ultimately will be an agency decision in terms of issuing the plan, and the courts will review that to basically say, was this decision completely unsupported by the facts or arbitrary and capricious is what they call it, which you can kind of translate as, unreasonable or made out of spite or something like that. So the judge's review is kind of limited into saying, was this decision under one of those categories? So to some extent, there might be some arguments of, they might say, look, this 1% reduction is completely unsupported by the evidence because we have this X and Y. But again, the judge isn't in the position that you might be thinking of a judge usually overseeing a case. The judge is coming from the position of, I'm going to uphold this decision unless these certain items. So. Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
So a lot of the framework we've kind of thought about with an initial management plan for Douglas, and this is consistent with what the initial management plans for the other AMAs were, is that it's kind of a transitional plan. There is a lot of information to learn about what an AMA is, how an AMA operates, how all of these things fit together. And we have some data from this area, but we also are kind of creating a new baseline in this area because we know things have changed since the implementation of the AMA. So a lot of times, this initial management plan has been kind of treated as a transitional plan. And that's kind of what we are, that's kind of our starting point here, is thinking about this as a transitional plan where we're making sure that we're doing this education, where we're making sure we're having these kind of deep background conversations and also allowing a lot of time to ask questions and clarify things about these AMA requirements and processes. We will need to introduce some conservation requirements, and that's also what we've been talking about the last couple of days, is what can those conservation requirements be? How can we reduce groundwater withdrawals and start moving things in the right direction, even as we are doing this kind of learning and transitioning into a regulated area? So you all have seen this slide a bunch of times now. You've seen the worksheets. This is all familiar at this point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work through each category. And what I would like to do, what my goal for the next about half hour is I'm going to reflect back to you a little bit of what I heard, what we heard throughout the last 24 hours. And I want to hear back if I'm mischaracterizing anything, if I didn't quite get it down right, if I'm missing anything, or if there are other things that come to mind. We have more of those worksheets, they're at the front. If folks have additional ideas they want to jot down, or if they want to take additional time and work through some concepts over the next few days or week or so, we are accepting additional comments through December 8th. Related to the agricultural conservation program. I think I told the table that was sitting over here earlier, if you need more time than that, let me know. Let's talk about it. If there are ways ADWR can be supporting some of those side conversations, let me know. Let's talk about it. I know this type of conversation requires a shift in thinking, and we want to make ourselves available to support those conversations in whatever ways we can. So we'll start with the base program. Excuse me. All right. So what I heard from the various discussions on the base program is that there's a lot of interest in some kind of a tiered program for the base program. So maybe some tiers, some differences in how we calculate water duties potentially based on acreage, like farm size. There might be small acreage, medium acreage, high acreage. It might be based on consumptive use, so it would be more related to crop type, low, medium, high. And there might be some considerations related to location. Could we consider different methods for that calculation if they're in areas of subsidence or fissuring? There seems to be a lot of interest in customization kind of around that type of thing. So I think that's one of the most significant things that I heard that we ADWR should work on is, okay, if we were to structure something like this, what would it look like? We also heard a lot about the differences between cover cropping and double cropping. We heard a lot about considerations related to leaching, and maybe those considerations might also be localized or dependent on water and soil conditions. And we also heard a lot about where there might be consumptive use data available and the need for that data to be peer-reviewed or scientific in some way. Are there any questions, or is there anything that I missed there? Are there any clarifications we can make in this section? Go with you first.
We have recognition of differences between cover and double cropping. I would also respectfully request that you put in there about crops that, for example, grapes, our growing season is only 5 months long, and that's it. We don't water when our vines are asleep.
Okay.
So that should also be recognized as a difference when it comes to cropping.
So maybe to put that in different words, you're suggesting something like a recognition of crops with short growing seasons?
Short growing,
Low water.
low water.
Low water use, okay. Thank you.
Can we apply that to morning rate? I don't water out alpha when it's asleep. Yeah, if the converse sleep, we don't water that out.
And most crops, you know, they're summer or winter crops.
Okay, well, and that's kind of why I was trying to put it in a little bit more of generic terms. Is there some kind of more generic term that we might have around off seasons for given crops or,
And just have seasonal crops.
yeah,
And they have off season.
okay. Okay, that's something that we can look into a little bit
Or not
further.
double cropping, basically.
Thanks. I think you have a comment.
All right. It might be interesting to look into some of what like NRCS and FSA does with total or gross income off an agricultural unit. To separate out the small operations from the large operations. It could be based on, I know with FSA, you have to provide documented support of your income. And most of us little folks, we don't really generate that much income.
Okay.
When you put it in terms of $500,000 or $1 million off an egg operation.
We'll make a note of that. That might be something we'll need to look further into.
That,
I could imagine something like that being challenging on our side because we wouldn't necessarily want folks to have to provide their financial information to us, right? I'd have to wrestle with that a little bit.
I'm not smart enough to sort that out. But it might be a vehicle, somebody that has much more depth in financial knowledge
Okay,
and legal knowledge than I do.
okay.
I
We'll have to explore that a little bit.
put together a brain trust and see if that might be an easy way to protect the small guys as you implement.
Okay,
it.
all right. Any other comments?
And you also mentioned peer reviewed, and could you add published?
And I do have that on the slide. I just didn't say it out loud. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-mm. Good. Okay, good. All right, this one you'll see that I have a couple of question marks on the slide. I think I heard a little bit of mixed things between the different groups on this particular category. So what we're looking at here is in the initial AMAs, we had a few programs that came in the third management plans, the best management practices program and the historic cropping program. And then there's one brand new program that came in in the fifth management plans in the initial AMAs, which is the integrated farm program. I think that the two tables kind of had totally different conversations on this category. So this is definitely one that I'm curious to see if there's any additional discussion about. I think what I heard related to the best management practices program is that if there was a best management practices program, it might be helpful to have some specific management and maintenance types of practices related to drip irrigation, making sure that specific materials are being used and that there's maintenance and winterization happening related to those drip systems and that kind of thing. I also heard some discussion that there might be a preference to just exclude the BMP program from this first management plan. Do we have, before I move on, I can open it up for comments. Are there any additional thoughts on any of that?
On the BNP program, like this, you know, for the other thing, it means
Sure.
the farmer did the BNPs, then they would have unlimited, they could use as much water to irrigate as they wanted, and I think there should still be a cap that the farmer just instead of using BNPs, that they can't pump as much as they want, and they would also be limited.
Okay, so if there was to be a BMP program, we would want to still have some volumetric cap associated with it. Okay,
what I saw on the BMPs, they're pretty outdated, right? They're geared more towards ditching, right? Would be nice to develop BMPs for pivot irrigation, for drip irrigation.
Within the INA, we were given to understand there was only one person in the state to do enforcement. Under the AMA, as we build these different caveats into it, is DWR going to have the personnel to enforce them or regular or even track them?
So the good news is about our compliance team is that we've actually been growing our compliance team probably since, so I think, do we have 3, I think? Or is it 4? 4? Okay. So it's better than it was. It's better than it was, but there's still a lot to do there. Something we are working on within active management area staff is building up some expertise within our staff to be able to look more closely at some of these types of things. We're building capacity both in the AMAs and on our compliance side. Is there ever enough? I don't know. I can't guarantee that we would be able to look at every single instance of every single thing, but we are ramping up some of those compliance efforts and definitely trying to build in additional capacity there. It's a good question. Good. All right, integrated farming program. So the integrated farming program is the one where you might have multiple irrigation grandfathered rights, and you can combine multiple irrigation grandfathered rights, combine the allotments, take a small cut to that total allotment, but be able to use that water across those IGFRs as you would like to manage it. I think one of the 2 groups talked a little bit more about this than the other. It sounded kind of generally like there might be a preference to include this type of program in the first management plan for Douglas, largely because of the ability to combine non-contiguous IGFRs. Does that seem to accurately reflect the discussions you all had? Not seeing anything, maybe? Good, okay. Good, all right. And in the other category, so I think this first line item here is something we've been hearing as long as we've been having meetings in Douglas, is that there's a lot of concern from folks about distinguishing between very large and small farm operations, ensuring that some of the history of small farming operations in the Douglas area can be maintained going forward. We've heard that as an important piece of feedback, an important piece of what you all see as an important part of the culture here. How that exactly plays into a given program or a given management plan, we'll have to work through that. We'll have to figure that out. But I think that's, I just want to acknowledge that that's definitely something that we've heard from you all, not just in the last 24 hours, but really throughout this process. In addition to that, we heard a little bit about a desire for incentives or some kind of funding around low water use or high economic value crops, some kind of funding opportunities around pilot projects or testing out new technologies, new techniques, new crop types, those types of things. We understand that in farming, it's hard to make these types of changes if you don't know things are going to work. So it might be helpful to have funding available to allow folks to test out those types of transitions. We also heard that it would be helpful for us to engage with the local NRCDs, possibly with the NRCS, and perhaps have some considerations around farms that might be working directly with the local NRCD on conservation practices. And we also heard some requests for consideration around non-irrigation issues, and some of the ability to bring in new industry and that type of thing. Is there anything that I'm missing in this category? I know there's a lot here. I think this was kind of our most broad and wide-ranging discussion. Have I captured everything there, or am I missing anything? Good, I'll take the silence as maybe I've got it. Good.
I think you're with the NRC and the local conservation district. I can't stress enough working with them because we already have best management practices in place. And a lot of funding depends upon that. In their ranking systems, how you are ranked according to your best management practices.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So that's kind of our summary. You all covered a whole lot of ground. And I know I keep saying this, but I can't emphasize enough how productive these conversations have been, and how much this information will really be able to help inform the way we start to develop these programs. Any additional comments you all might have, if you want to make additional notes, if you have additional thoughts, those can be submitted to managementplans@easywater.gov. I know a lot of you have my business cards. You could always email those to me and I'll make sure that they get included. Managementplans@easywater.gov. If you're able to send those in by December 8th, that's when we'll start really aggregating a lot of this and kind of working toward our next steps. But like I said, if there's additional time needed, if you're really working on a more expansive concept, let us know and we can provide some flexibility on that timeline. Our intent here is that we'll use the thoughts and input that you all provided here to start to develop some initial details, some initial concepts. So we'll take this all back, we'll start to build it out. And then we will bring those kind of slightly more built out structures back for future meetings to have additional conversations. We do, like I said, intend to have additional meetings to talk through the other sectors. We have municipal and industrial sectors that we'll be working through. And we also will be posting everything online on our Douglas AMA website to make sure that everything is available. There's a lot to do here. I know the devil's always in the details. So I appreciate you all being willing to lay out some of these concepts. I think we've got a good framework that we're going to be able to build on and create some details and create some structures around this that might be really productive for this area. Go
I was
ahead.
going to add really quick, I tried to answer to your question from earlier about if the plan were to be appealed, would it be in place or would it be paused during that appeal? So basically, under statute, the court has the authority to pause it in whole or in part based on a showing of good cause, and that would mean the person or organization appealing the plan would have to convince the court that it's would be appropriate to do so. So it wouldn't be automatic. So if it was appealed for judicial review, if nothing else if nothing more than that, the plan would be in place and would be in effect pending that review, unless that person petitioned the court to basically put a hold on it in whole or in part, and they would have to convince the court that it's the right decision.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
But if it was put on hold, would that stop farmers from farming?
No, it would be the requirements and details of the plan would not be in place. But everything else would be going on as well.
Think so?
Yeah.
Good. All right, so I know we've used this timeline a few times. Like I mentioned, we are going to be having some additional public meetings. What we'll try to do is, once we get back and are able to work through some of the details here, we'll be publishing a little bit more of an extended schedule for our next couple of meetings, so that you all can get that on your calendars. We plan to continue public meetings basically through spring, which is not a lot of time. Go ahead.
Will all your public meetings be within the AMA or will you go in other places?
So any public meetings that we have in person, we'll have here in the AMA. There might be some of them that might be reasonable to do virtually. What comes to mind for me is those municipal and industrial meetings we might be able to do those virtually just because it's a different crowd. It's going to be a smaller crowd for that because it's a smaller category in this AMA.
Your irrigation meetings will be here within the AMA.
That's our intent, yes.
Thank you.
So the kind of framework we've laid out here is that we'll take the next couple months to work through those individual sectors. We'll also have a meeting or meetings to follow up on any other topics that we might need to include in the plans. And we'll also make sure that we have time to follow up on some of the, like I said, the framework conversations that we've had today. As we build out some of these concepts, we'll bring them back for further discussion. Our intent is to use these public meetings, use these discussions to draft some initial regulatory language. So like I've said, the bulk of these management plans is that they're a regulatory document and they include formal, legally enforceable language. So what we'll do is we'll actually write a draft of that legally enforceable language and we'll bring that back to you all for discussion, so that you all can comment on it and make sure that the way we're writing it out makes sense and that we're not missing anything or turning a blind eye to any potential implications to it. Whoops, I apparently didn't put my other timeline slide on here. Once that initial regulatory language is published, let me see if I can pull this up quickly. There we are. Like I said, we'll have a formal adoption process. So we'll have to have a review with the GUAC, and then we have to have a formal hearing. After the formal hearing and the public comment period, we issue findings from the hearing and an order of adoption. And at that time, we also send out notices of conservation requirements to all regulated entities. Assuming we are able to meet our target there of adopting the management plan by the end of next year, those conservation requirements would go into effect on January 1st, 2027. So I know these timelines are long. I know these processes are slow, but we really do appreciate your engagement, your patience with us through this establishment process. I would be remiss if I missed an opportunity to remind everybody of the deadline. March 1st is our deadline for applications for grandfathered rights. We still have some copies of grandfathered right applications in the back here if you need them. And we'd be happy to also answer any questions, any individual questions after the meeting about all of that.
Did they set the fee at $75?
Yes, the fee was formally changed. It's $75 per application. The substantial capital investment is an attachment. That is not a separate application. So $75 per application. Good. All right. And with that, we've worked through everything. Thank you all again for your patience through this marathon. Do we have any questions before we wrap up? Go ahead.
So then let me understand this. So all this great information we gave you, so now you guys are gonna go back, you're gonna look over this and see what ideas you think are valid or possible or?
So yes, so we will review them internally to make sure that any frameworks fit within our legal structures. to make sure that anything you all have suggested is actually something we could theoretically implement. I think a lot of what we've talked about is reasonable to implement, but I'm gonna get Ben and our other attorneys to review it really closely to make sure that we're not running afoul of anything there. From there, we'll start to build out some additional details, some just additional thoughts that we might have on what that structure might look like in more detail, and then we'll bring it back for additional discussion with you all.
Just don't have that date yet.
Not yet, but we'll plan to publish those within the next couple weeks here.
And the GUAC, it has to be in place by August.
In theory, in order so that we can get that recommendation from them for the management plan, I do not have a timing on when that might be established at this point.
And everyone who submits other comments and stuff, do we get to see those, or we won't know until you guys take them back? Or?
So something we've done in the past is post any written submitted comments online. We could certainly do that again in this case if that would be helpful for folks. And I'm seeing at least a couple little nods here, so we can plan to do that.
And those who are allowed to submit comments need to own property within the AMA?
We won't necessarily be checking that. At this point, we are willing to accept comments from folks who are willing to participate. But again, we would be bringing any potential concepts, any potential ideas back to this group for further discussion.
So potentially someone from Denver, Colorado could be expressing their comments about our AMA and its implementation.
In theory, this is intended to be an open process. So at this point, I'm just like, we haven't verified any of your addresses. We won't be checking on where folks are submitting comments from.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, that could happen, but as Natalie said, we'd bring it back to you all and you can let us know how you feel about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, in theory, someone from Denver could have a comment and you guys all say, hey, that's a good idea, or you could say that's a terrible idea, but.
Well, then that goes to his comment, will we be able to see those comments?
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that's what we kind of, I just heard from you all is we've posted those comments online in the past, and it sounds like we should continue doing that here. And so we'll go ahead and post those online. Yes.
Thank you.
Good. Great. Oh, go
I
ahead.
don't have any more questions.
You don't have any more questions? Oh, wow. Great. Well, I do just want to thank you all again. I know I've said this multiple times throughout this process, but the engagement of this crowd and your willingness to throw ideas around and spitball with us, this is really invaluable. And I genuinely think it's going to result in something that's better, more customized to Douglas in a way that maybe we haven't seen in all of the other AMAs. So I think this is really important. And we deeply appreciate your time and efforts here. We will look forward to talking again with you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.